I was collecting all these comics and I was reading all of them, everything I'd get. I'd have stacks of them to read at night. And I hit a point where I was like, why am I, this idea I love so much. And I was like, why am I constantly writing these movies for producers and they don't get made, or, they're just stuck in development hell? I'm just going to make a comic. I read more comics than I watch movies. Why don't I do that?
Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I'm Jeremy.
I'm Alan.
And you are officially tuned in to GG Everybody, your ultimate pop culture podcast where we hit start on all things geek. From video games and comic books to tabletop RPGs, tech trends, and beyond, we're here to level up your fandom. Whether you're a console warrior, a dungeon master, or just someone who loves diving deep into geek culture, we've got something for you. Each episode, we tackle the biggest topics, hot takes, and hidden gems across your favorite fandoms. And so grab your dice, charge your controllers, and get ready to geek out. We have got ourselves quite a special guest today. I am being selfish in all the guests that I'm bringing on. They're all the coolest people that I know. And starting, we had Aidan Moore come on, talk about his book, and he's a super cool guy. And then we had Eamon Winkle come on, talk about his art, super cool guy. Another super cool guy here for you, Michael Schwartz, who is the writer for a wonderful series called Armored from Clover Press. And yeah, I'm excited to introduce you all to Michael and his background. So Michael, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Jeremy and Alan.
Yeah, of course. I guess to kind of get folks introduced to you, tell us a little bit about your background. I know that you come from a kind of a unique space professionally before arriving to, in the comic space that you now kind of occupy, as well as your other professional space. So if you give us a little bit of your Reader's Digest version of your professional background and what brings you joy day to day in your work.
Yeah, I come from the film world, I'd say, primarily animation. I've worked in so many different facets of the film industry. Like I started in marketing and somehow found my way into animation, where I became a production manager and I work in visual effects. But I also am a writer, so I've written some kids movies. I call them entry-level horror kids movies. One's Netflix's Gnome Alone, and the other is a Hulu movie called R.L. Stine Zombie Town, which is based on one of the R.L. Stine books. So yeah, I've been living in this film world since film school. It's been, oh my God, probably like 16 to 18 years now I've been in the industry. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. And so you did that work and you're still doing that work now, right? Are there any projects that are kind of, maybe we'll get to this near the end of our little chat, but like on the back burner, anything that we can be looking forward to from you, or just things kind of stewing at the moment?
Yeah, I can, I'm sure I'll talk about kind of future creative projects, but like right now I'm working in visual effects. I'm working on a spin-off TV series of a very popular show. I can't say what it is. I'm working on an Amazon movie. This is on the visual effects side. So I call that kind of my day job, but it's not as secure of a job as it used to be. But yeah, I am working on a couple VFX shows right now. I have a horror movie coming out, hopefully sometime this year, to film festivals that I wrote. So there's a few things percolating. Yeah.
And the film side. Now let's talk about the comic side. So you have a pretty rich history and love of comics. Tell us a little bit about where this love of comics kind of came from and your background with collecting and what ultimately led you to work on your recent series, not. I guess it's not so recent anymore, is it? It's been a while, been quite a while in the making. But with your comic series, Armored.
I grew up, with a dad who was obsessed with comic books. Like he was a big comic book collector. So every weekend he would drag me to comic book shops. He even tells me a story that I was in a sling, like one of those baby carriers. and he'd be shopping at the comic shops, without my mom really realizing it. He's a big Silver Age collector, so
Right.
he was going in, dragging me in. But when I was a young kid, I remember just having to hang. I, I didn't consider it a bad thing, but like my dad would just be chatting with the comic book store owners, and I would just be digging through like 25-cent bins. Back then, it was all
Hmm.
25-cent bins,
Right.
and looking at whatever toys they had out. That's how I got into comics. My dad would literally read me Amazing Spider-Man every night before bed. And he did that he read Fantastic Four to me. He read some Avengers to me, but like Amazing Spider-Man is what really stuck with me. And it was reading Amazing Fantasy 15 and Amazing Spider-Man #1 right through to Amazing Spider-Man 100. And so and then he got me a pull list when I was 6 years old. So I may have even been a bit younger than six.
Wow. You
Yeah,
had your own pull at
I
six
did.
years
I
old.
did. My first
What?
pull.
Yeah. What
Yeah,
was it? What was
yeah,
it?
it was Silver Surfer. So it would have been the Ron Lim
Nice.
and the Dale Keown Hulk.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
And then eventually, obviously, McFarlane's Spider-Man was next. I think it was those two, and then I added Spider-Man to it. Yeah.
That's awesome. So this obviously you come kind of steeped in that love of comics and that development of comics, and now we've had an opportunity to chat and kind of learn a little bit about the impetus behind your writing of Armored, and also your impetus in getting back into comic collecting, because something kind of, well, not kind of, like very tragic really for any comic collector happened to you and your dad. You want to share a little bit about that?
Well, I had just like moved into my house, and I was like, oh, I finally have the room to take all of my comics out of storage. I had like, boxes that I would travel, from condo to condo or rent, apartment to apartment. But then I finally had a house, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to bring I had a lot of them in storage at my mom's. I brought them all to my house, and I needed to clean out this area where I was going to store them. So I put them in my garage. That night, someone broke into my garage and stole my entire collection. And a lot of those comics, like I said, were ones that not only were I collected them when I was a kid, like from, those early pull lists, but my dad would give me duplicates of Silver Age books where if he upgraded a book, he would give me the old one. And they were gone. Everything. I had not just comic books, movie posters. I had my winter gear. I live up in Canada, and I had my winter jacket and boots stolen. It was the weird. They
Just
stole
everything.
everything.
They
They
were
were
like
just like
everything out of there. Clear it
my
out.
my wife is still upset because they stole her American Girl dolls. So it was, yeah, it's devastating for the whole
Yeah.
family. Let me tell
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But you've been in the process now, slowly but surely, trying to like not recreate, but like, yeah, replenish that
yeah.
collection, right?
I,
Back to
I've
those stories that you
yeah.
used to collect.
Yeah, I've done pretty well. I'm pretty lucky. I have a pawn shop near me that sells a lot of comics for 50 cents. Like
Okay.
basically anything that goes in there is 50 cents except for Silver Age books. But I think, Jeremy, you and I got to hang out at a few conventions. I think you know me by now. I like to dive into those cheap bins, and you've
Oh
seen me
yeah.
pull out stuff.
Oh yeah. Yeah. If you ever get a chance to see Michael at a show, you will find him and Brad Gullickson as well from Comic Book Couples Counseling. You will find them both in the bins, because they do love themselves a good hunt. So
Yeah.
it's really fun to see. Of course, and I think it just goes to really like your commitment to, or your draw to that thing that you love. Like sometimes,
Mhm.
when somebody loses something like a collection like that, it can serve as a disconnect almost, right, from that hobby. Some folks might say, oh well, it's a sign, like, I'm not gonna get back into that again. I don't get my heart broken again or something like that. But I think the love of comics really really drew you back in, and now you can't resist those 50-cent books, and you can't resist
Oh,
diving through those boxes, right?
you're totally right. And like, I actually did say that. I remember telling my wife, I said, I'm done collecting comics. I'll never collect one again. I was heartbroken. It was
Yeah.
devastating. Yeah.
Yeah. So then let's talk about how you went from collecting comics to creating comics. So tell us a little bit about Armored. Where did the idea for this story sort of come from, and how did the connection with Clover Press happen, and you begin to go through the process of bringing this book to life?
Yeah, well, I do have to say, like, there is a bit of connection with the film industry in that, like, the idea existed. The idea of a boy or a girl finding a suit of armor and it being haunted by a ghost. That is the concept of the book, obviously. A haunted suit of armor, basically, is what I tell everyone. But that idea, it probably came around the same time that around the time my comics were stolen. It was pretty early on, and I always thought, like, oh, maybe it could be a movie idea, or maybe it could be a TV show, but nothing felt right, and this idea just kind of sat there. At one point, I did pitch to Jackie Chan's producers, um, uh, basically a Chinese story set around this slightly, but it was rejected really quickly by some Canadian producers that were the go-betweens. And so the idea just didn't really work. I don't know. It just wasn't working for me. I just couldn't put it to paper. And then, I was collecting all these comics and I was reading all of them, everything I'd get. I'd have stacks of them to read at night. And I hit a point where I was like, why am I, this idea I love so much? And I was like, why am I constantly writing these movies for producers and they don't get made, or they're just stuck in development hell? I'm just going to make a comic. I read more comics than I watch movies. Why don't I do that? And so something just clicked. It was like I picked up a comic and I thought, well, I can do this. At least I thought I could. I didn't
Yeah,
realize how
like it's
difficult.
hard,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know how to get an artist. I'm not an artist. I wanted to be a comic book artist, but I started to pursue film and I kind of dropped the art side of things. But I didn't know how to be a comic writer. So it was a whole learning process. I could talk for like an hour about that. But finding Clover, it was really my first step was writing a script, and then I found an editor and I hired an editor. And my editor at the time was working with Clover, and he sent it to Clover. He just sent it to them, and the reaction from Hank Canales from Clover, who's the publisher there, was just so positive. And I'm not
Mm.
used to that in the film industry.
Right, yeah.
Like,
You're not used to somebody being like, "This is a great idea."
yeah, they
You're
were.
used to them being like, "Ah, terrible." Yeah.
Yeah, he was just like, "We want it," and I was like, "Wait, what? There's no notes. There's not like the film industry is like, it's yeah, it's neat, but we got some changes. Maybe we'll do it." So it was just such a positive experience, and they're a new, I want to say new company, but they've been around for like 5 or 6 years. But I say new because they're really starting to make a name for themselves with their Marvel art of art books. They do
Mhm,
like the
mhm.
Marvel art of David Mack, Alex Malev, David Nakayama, and I was like, this seems like a really cool company to be with. They're brand new. Let's give it a shot. So that's how that happened.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so I have spoken to this on Comic Book Keepers and some other podcasts. I've reviewed. You can find all the reviews for the Armored series on the Geekly Grind. A huge fan of the book. Again, I'm very selfish in the guests that I'm bringing on and the topics that I'm spotlighting because they're all things that I think are super cool. And so if you're listening to this, I would highly encourage you go and check out Armored. It's extremely good series. Probably most of all because it serves as a great entry point for young readers, right? And you were mentioning, Michael, how you got that pull list when you were 6 years old, and on Free Comic Book Day, you get, for example, you get some decent insights into some series that are good for kids, like Sonic the Hedgehog and some other things. But on the whole, it feels like the comic industry is still it's kind of grasping for some of those stories that are approachable for
Yeah.
kids and have themes that can appeal across a broad spectrum. And I feel like Armor does a really good job of
Well,
that. So
you've been such a big supporter of the series. We didn't even really know each other when you read the first issue. Like, you took a chance on it and you gave it a read, and your feedback was just so positive. So I appreciate that, Jeremy. Thank
yeah,
you.
no, absolutely. We met at I think it was WonderCon
WonderCon, yeah,
last year and saw a cool sticker, and Lance and I were like, "Hey, this is a cool sticker." And then
yeah,
you kind of went into your spiel and I guess the last kind of major question I think before we move into the topics I have for you is
Yeah.
what did the because I saw you on the circuit, I saw you out there hustling. What did that experience over the last year being your own? I mean, of course, Clover is a fantastic partner and everything else, but like you really did hit the pavement to do some of your own promoting, right? And your own
Mhm.
networking. So what did that experience teach you and going into presumably your next comic project, like, what do you think you're going to do differently or how are you going to approach it differently?
Yeah, like I think with in most, if you're not with a Marvel or a DC or Image probably has a promotional big promotional weight behind them. But if you're not with them, I think it's up to the creator to really promote their books. There's some creators out there that are incredible promoters, but you do still have to have something that people like. And I was getting enough feedback from people that it made me believe that I should keep pushing it. I don't think I would have harassed as many people as I did to read it if it was a lukewarm reaction. I would have just kind of tried to get it out there and get readers. But I felt like enough people, I had Jeff Johns read it, R.L. Stein read it, and they were giving me such positive feedback. I was like, I'm just going to go for it. I think it's really important to get people, to read it because no one else is going to do that for you. And I have learned a lot, and I do have another book coming out, hopefully this year, or we may kickstart it at some point this year. No plan yet, but I do think I would do things slightly different. Like I don't know yet what that is, Jeremy, but I know I have learned so much from being kind of on the con circuit, and I did a ton of signings this year and just learned a ton about the industry. I knew the industry as a fan, but now knowing it as a creator, oh my goodness, I feel like I could write a book about
Yeah. Maybe that's next, right? Where can folks find you online? What are your socials and stuff? We'll plug that before we jump into our topics for the day.
Yeah, probably the best place to find me right now would be Instagram at Mike Schwartz Writes, or over on Blue Sky. I think it's Mike Schwartz Writes, or the Mike Schwartz.
I think it's the Mike Schwartz
The
on
Mike
Blue
Schwartz.
Sky.
Okay, thank you. Even I don't know. I'm the Mike Schwartz on X as well, but I just don't find myself using it as much. But you can find me on really any platform. I'm sure I'm on TikTok too.
Yeah. Somewhere you can find him around.
I'm all over. Yeah.
All over the place. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for shedding some insights there. But let's go ahead and jump into our first topic of the day, and that is digital dependencies in gaming. So you're listening to this on Tuesday, February 11th. So you are likely aware that the PlayStation Network went offline for like a full 24 hours, and pretty much for the majority of that time, Sony didn't say anything, which was, more baffling, I think, to most. Alan, I know you're usually doing your PS5 still offline, right? Have you gotten your replacement?
No, yeah, I got one up and going again. And actually, like that day, I was like, oh, hang on, let me go check out like the free games that they give out for the month of February.
Right,
And
right.
I'm like, just met with that error code, and I was like, what's going? I thought maybe something was wrong. I'm like, come on, I can't have two bum PS5s like in a row. What is this? So
Yeah.
then I logged onto Blue Sky, and everybody's like complaining, like, I can't get on. I've got these games that I want to play, and it's there's this online requirement. Um, and I saw some people who were like, I guess, just really, really unfortunate in that they had a PS5, but they needed to pair the detachable disk drive to it, and that
Uh-huh.
needs internet
It
connection,
needs
and so they
internet.
couldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like even if you had like, oh, I'm sort of hedging against that with this sort of physical disk that I can supposedly play whenever I want, but like
Hmm.
I have to go through this crazy process of like validating to Sony servers that
That it's
this
a
is a
proper
real
drive.
disk
Yeah.
drive or whatever before I can put the game in, which is like the dumbest thing ever. But yeah.
It, it's pretty wild that, I mean, like, to clarify, like, you only need it when you initially set up the drive, but even still, the fact that when you connect a physical drive, to read this that Sony needs to run it by its servers to like give it the thumbs up is pretty crazy. And so folks were not able to find shelter in that during the outage. And you know, to your point, it's the free games, right? It's the whole digital library that PlayStation offers. If you access it via their cloud streaming, you were locked out essentially of your library. And you know, there's definitely convenience, accessibility. You know, arguably more affordable, right, to have access to all of those for the price of your PSN membership, but at the cost of inconveniences like these when it goes offline. I guess Michael, we were talking before we came on, and you're not necessarily like steeped in the gaming world as much, with the writing and the work that you do. Most of the work, most of the game that you're doing is, I think, on the Switch and such. But like, when you're kind of on the out, when you're looking at this and thinking about like gaming in the modern age and like these digital connections and cloud gaming and such, like, you strike me as an analog kind of person.
I am, but that's growing up in the 80s maybe. But I'm a big believer in physical media still. So I don't, this is the thing I wrestle with. Like, my kids wanted me to get the Switch, I forget what it's called, like the Nintendo cloud service where we can play games all the time. But I'm also always wanting to buy like the physical box still with the little cartridge, because I feel like, what if something goes down? What if the internet goes down? And I remember, was it PS3? I don't remember if it was PS3 or another. It was a while ago when they just started removing movies that people had downloaded.
Yeah,
and you could only access on the cloud because they lost the rights to it. And to me, this was like a huge like red flag for streaming from cloud services, because you're paying for that content. And I know PS5, like they said they're gonna, how many days free are you getting because of it?
It's 5 days. They're gonna give
5
folks
days.
sort of like we know you lost about a day. We'll give you 5.
Okay. So they're making up for it, but like I don't know. What happens? What happens if some hacker comes in and just totally destroys the cloud and you've lost everything?
That's the thing, is that back in 2011 they were down for about a month. Like, you could not, like, back then I think the PS3 was far more forgiving. You could still play your and most people play discs. It was very, like, I think, pretty rare thing to have like a massive digital library in the PS3 era. But like, if that would have happened now, that's what everyone was like freaking out. Like, after a couple of hours, oh, are we going to have that again? We're like a month where we just can't play video games on our PS5.
Right.
That's wild.
And if you have friends like in the tech space, right? Like you hear these things about like 99.99999% uptime, right? So you think about like every time you lose like one of those nines, it's a lot more time than you think, right? So there's a huge difference between like a 99.99% uptime versus a 0.999, right? And like if the servers went down, when they go down for an hour, you're like, maintenance, right? When they go down for 2 to 4 hours, you're like, they should have done this overnight, but maybe it's a big update. When it goes down for 12 plus hours and Sony doesn't say anything, you're like, my digital life is ruined. Right? Like, that's the end of the world. It might as well be an apocalypse. So I think that's really, it's exposing those cracks, right? Like we were saying, like, to your point, Michael, like if something like this can happen, they'll give you back 5 days now. I think in a couple weeks time, a month's time, nobody's gonna be thinking about it again, probably, but until the next outage. But it just kind of shows the threat of like having this dependency on these digital spaces and not being able to, have the physical disc, the physical cartridge, and never mind the fact that we don't get guides anymore. Like you get the Switch cases now, and you're like, yay, I got a plastic case to hold this little tiny cartridge and nothing inside. It's it's kind of like, it makes me think of like your first apartment, right? You just open it, it's completely empty except for like one little coffee table, maybe like a beanbag chair and a TV. That's what it makes me think of when you open up those
When
cases.
you open those cases.
Yeah. So, anyway, so I think that's, and this also extends not just to like the cloud services, right? The introduction of digital only consoles, right? So the Xbox Series S, for example, no drive, right? It's all based on accessing Game Pass. And the recent PlayStations, right? The PS5 Pro, no drive in sight. You had to purchase it, which I did because I am an analog guy. So there's more and more conversations about how consoles are becoming digital by default. And so how does the analog generation cling to maintaining the discs, maintaining that physical collection when the industry as a whole appears to just be sailing on by and being like, okay, y'all are on your own, y'all are just doing digital. That's that's tough for me, and I've already commiserated with Alan on this. I'm holding out hope that they will continue to hold onto the physical media SKUs. Give me an option. Just give me I'll give you more money, Sony. Just
Yeah, as a movie collector, I'm still fortunate that there's so many people collecting like Blu-rays and 4K discs because there's companies that still exist releasing them, but the even the price point's going up for that stuff.
yeah.
Um,
And it's interesting, like this whole conversation around analog as well is an
mhm.
interesting thing because we're kind of seeing it swinging back in that direction, right? Like records. Like
Yeah,
we're seeing much more like the vinyl, popularity is surging. People want to get vinyl players again and they want to have big walls of records and they want to, so I'm wondering if we're going to see a sort of like counterculture kind of movement against all this digital stuff and the retro market's going crazy
yeah,
in gaming, like video games that you would never look at twice in a thrift shop 12, 15 years ago are going for like $250 on eBay now. It's just
crazy.
crazy. So
No, for
um
sure. I think that as gamers, we're gonna have to like, especially as like it's kind of crazy to think about, but the PS5 is already like halfway through its own life cycle, and we're already getting rumors of the PlayStation 6 and like what chip's going to be in there, and what might that cost, and what their plan's going to be, what doesn't have physical media at all. So kind of looking towards that for sure. Like as a community, we're gonna have to really push Sony and like shame them really to like do stuff like remove the whole check on those discs, those like optional disk drives that people were having issues pairing because nothing is forever. Sony could go out of business. They just decided not run those validation servers anymore because it's not worth it to them. So
right.
like you could end up with just a bunch of perfectly functioning disks that disk drives that will just not read a disk because that little server isn't running or Sony itself just doesn't exist. So I think
Yeah.
that like once we like okay, we're not doing PS5 anymore, then we really got to be vocal and like say, "Hey, no, you need to now take that off," so we
Mhm.
Yeah.
can preserve this stuff.
Yeah. And emulators come into play too, right? Like the idea of
Yeah,
like, having ROMs and emulators that can potentially, as technology evolves as well, that might become the only way that folks are able to experience and enjoy those in the future. But as we've also seen, companies like to play both sides. They want to say, no, you can't use the emulators. And also, no, we're not going to make you let you have access to this media anymore, which leaves you in a
And
precarious
it's not
spot.
just that,
You
but
know,
like companies, like I think Nintendo even got caught doing this, like because they didn't do a good enough job preserving their own stuff. Like
right,
they'll go and get pirated versions that you just torrent and then sell that in a digital in the eShop or on Steam. And like the only reason they could do that was because someone decided to pirate it like 20 years ago, which is
right,
crazy.
yeah, that's so nuts. They're like, you can't provide that for free, but we're going to package it into a little disc in a little studio apartment of a case and sell it for $60, and it will never go down in price because we're Nintendo, and we don't need to. Um, yeah. So, anyways, it's really interesting. I'm we had the most recent PSN outage. Steam's had downtime before. Like, this isn't unique to any particular system uh, or gaming structure, but it speaks to the broader industry, I think, and the broader threat of what does it mean to own something in the digital age. Like, do you quote own it, right? And that leads back to the legislation, I think, that was passed in California. What, it
Yeah,
was
it was
just California,
California.
right, Alan? Yeah.
Yeah, just
So
California.
where it says, it says you don't own when you buy something anymore. Like, it has to specifically say that you have, like, you own a license. Like, you don't own the game, but you own a license to a game, and that the license can be, suspended. So there was this lawsuit around it, and I think it had to go back. It went back to that the Sony removing like media and stuff like that as well. That was back in 2023. Before that too, but the most recent time was back in 2023. They started pulling movies and stuff because they ended their relationship with Discovery. And so that's when people were losing movies and stuff like that. Because I was remembering that too. I'm like, oh yeah, that did happen, and I feel like it wasn't that long ago, and it wasn't. It was like late 2023, and then after that, they had all this conversation about like, okay, well, if we don't really have access to our stuff, then we need to know what we're paying for when we're buying something at GameStop, right, or at Best Buy. And so
So
California's like, okay, now you just you don't own a game, you own a license.
so this license, does it come with like a 10-year license, like basically a contract, like this license is good for 10 years, you might
That's
get
the
it
thing,
more.
Michael. We don't know. It's just like a
Wow.
surprise. You don't have it anymore. And like that law, it was really more for the consumer to be informed. It's just because, I think most people do think if I bought it, it's mine. So now it's just more of like, hey, just be aware that th- what they're really selling you is a license, not really like uh ownership of like that specific copy. But I think that it shows that like as gamers we can be vocal and we can push back. Like Sony backtracked on getting rid of those shows from Discovery. Like they ended up renegotiating, and then nothing was ever taken from people's libraries. But like I know for on the film and TV side, like on Amazon, is I've seen it show up often where like they will just take people's stuff, and I just think that that particular group is not like as vocal or doesn't rally quite the way gamers do when they're very upset. And so like a lot of people have just straight up just like stuff disappear from their Amazon library, and they
Yeah.
just aren't unable to do anything about it.
Yeah. So it was in September 2024. Newsom signed AB 2426, and it was effective starting in January 1st. So it's effective now. And so basically, digital storefronts must clearly inform consumers when they're purchasing a revocable license to access digital goods, such as video games, movies, music, and ebooks, rather than obtaining full ownership rights. So they're prohibited from using terms like a buy or purchase unless they explicitly disclose that the transaction grants a revocable license and not outright ownership. So they can say like, buy this, but you're buying a revocable thing. Like you're buying a license that can to digital access that you might lose. So yeah, it's just crazy.
This
Like
is why I don't get into digital comics. I can't do
yeah.
it. I
Yeah.
worry that they're going to take my comics from me.
I know, and Eamon, we had a conversation with Eamon about this as well. Like one of the things that really stood out to me that he was talking about was how he loves taking up physical space in the world. And I think you listened to the episode because I actually called out seeing your book on a shelf in a comic shop. Like I was like, I went to a comic shop and I was just, poking around because I like to pop into comic shops and make sure they still exist. And, I saw there was like Armored, like number 4, no, number 3 or number 4 or something on the wall. And I was like, man, my buddy wrote that, like, and that's so cool to like see a book like physically in the space. And Naaman's like, yeah, like being able to hold it, being able to take up space in the world is really, really powerful versus like a digital space, like having like an icon on the Comixology or something. And the idea of that revocability, right? That you could put out Armored digitally in a marketplace.
Yep.
You could have 5,000 people buy it. It could be in their libraries. They're like, oh man, I'm gonna read this book one day, and it goes into the backlog of a bunch of people's book, libraries, right? And then a year from now, for whatever reason, the person that you're working with, the publisher, they go out of business. They decide they don't like Michaels anymore. They don't want to publish anything from any Michaels ever again. And all of a sudden, poof, like Armored no longer exists in those libraries, right? And so now, like your creative work is no more, like in those spaces, like versus the physical copy that I have in my boxes, right? And the trades that people would buy and have on their library. They can pick it up and read through it. And even if somebody gets on the news and says, you shouldn't read books by Michaels anymore, they can still do it. They can't, come and make me, come and take it. That's kind of the idea. So yeah, I'm analog for life. I do not like where we're headed in this digital age, but
And don't forget, like, I know we're specifically talking about gaming right now, but like on the TV and film side, you have a lot of shows that are like made for streaming companies. And more often than not, they're not putting out a physical copy. It's very rare. Like everyone gets like really excited when they put out a physical copy of a show that people love. But like, more and more we're seeing them just like it's gone. Like we wrote it as a loss, or like we just
or
don't
you have
feel
to
like
chase them
posting
around to
anymore. It's
4
not
different
worth it.
streaming services,
Yeah.
like a show goes offline and then you're like, okay, now you got to Google, where do I find this show? Like I wanted to watch New Girl the other day and I was like, oh, it used to be on Netflix and now it's over here. And now it's on Hulu. Okay, thank God I have a Hulu account, like, and it just seems so silly. Like in the past, I would have just went and grabbed my, DVD set of season 1 of New Girl and popped it in and started watching my show.
Well, I have a Netflix movie, and I
Yeah.
have no way to own this movie except I found that I could buy it from Germany. They have it, a physical Blu-ray copy in Germany. So I spent 50 bucks to buy my movie from Germany just so I had a physical copy of it.
Like I can't remember, like now that you bring that up, I cannot remember like the full specifics. But there was an actress who was like, I was in this Disney Plus show, and then she had like very young children, like I think like barely still babies, and she's like, and Disney just pulled it after like 2 seasons, and like, how am I going to show my children this thing that I was in, and like, because like it seemed like a decent enough size show, and someone on Twitter was like, hey, if you'd like, give me a PO box. I will send you a custom Blu-ray set, because like that person had basically downloaded the show some way. Who knows? I won't be asking any questions.
I own it. Quote.
Yeah. So and like the person did it. They made like a nice custom artwork and the box and the 2 Blu-rays, and they sent it to her, and she took a picture. She's like, "Oh, thank you so much to this person for sending this. Now I can show it to my kids when they get a bit older."
Well, look at the Willow, the TV series based on the movie Willow. It's gone. I didn't even get a chance to watch it. It was pulled so fast.
Yeah.
Oh, what, they pulled it already? I didn't even know that.
Oh yeah, they streamed every episode and then pulled the series.
And that's the thing, is like when it's an original series, like it's not like a New Girl where like, oh yeah, we'll just kick it off to another streamer. Like if it's a Netflix OG or Disney Prime, they'll just take it down, and like it doesn't. They're not going to give it to a competitor. It just kind of like, whoever can manage to scrounge up a copy, they can watch, but no one else really can.
Yeah. Anyways, so we'll see how the digital age continues to evolve. I will continue to cling to my analog collection as much as I can. And I've explained to Alan too, like the way that I collect, it's not like, I'm not like those collectors that has like a wall of video games. Like that's not how I collect. I buy a game, I play a game, and then I sell that game to buy my next game. Right. But I at least I physically own it. And some games that I like really, really, really like, then I'll hold on to it. Like I'll hold on to the case. I'm like, it's not worth it for me to sell. But even for, for a owner or a collector like that, that should be my right to continue that cycle. Mm-hmm. And also, like from a socioeconomic standpoint, for some folks, that's the only way that they're able to participate in that marketplace is they buy a game, they play it, and they sell it to help subsidize the purchase of their next one, whether it's through OfferUp or, GameStop historically gives horrible values. Of course, we joke about that, but like whatever that cycle looks like for them, right? That's how they participate in a world where you only have digital media. you're paying 30, 40, 60, $70 for that digital media. And it's crazy how stringent their return policies are in the digital marketplace. Like the moment you activate it, like the moment you download it, you're done. Like you can't, like Steam has a little bit more flexibility. Like I think it's like 2 hours or less of playtime and they'll give you a refund. But Sony, if you download a game and you like open it, like just once, no refund. Like, and it's like that happened to me, with a game I spent like, $40 on or something, and I downloaded it, and I realized like a month later it was sitting in my library. I wasn't going to touch it. I don't even think I had opened it, but they're like, nope, it's done. So anyways, crazy. I hope that it evolves. I hope we see that counterculture. I hope we get more physical media. I hope we get a kind of vinyl surge for physical games or something. But it's kind of tied into the second topic of the day, which was on live service games, the state of live service games. And so, there's been most recently in the news, Sony reported canceling a live service God of War game, which was the most baffling piece of news I think I had heard in quite some time, because like you think about God of War, it is one of the like pillars of the single player action experience, right? You do not think of that world and think I can imagine a world where there are thousands of Kratoses and thousands of people that live in the world of God of War and they're all their own person and whatever. Like that didn't strike me as a universe that could spawn a live service game. And yet Sony had committed tens of millions of dollars and like 3 years of this studio Bluepoint's time to make a live service God of War game, only to like Kobe, like, and just toss it like after all of that time and effort. And it's one more nail in the coffin, I think, of the broader live service strategy that Sony attempted to adapt. And I mean, when we were doing GG Dispatch, Alan, you and I talked about this, and I think we called it,
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
time. I think we called it dead to rights, like that this was never going to work. And, because, Sony saw dollar signs in their eyes. They saw Fortnite, they saw Minecraft, they saw Roblox, like they saw these games and these structures, and they're like, oh man, like we want to get on that. And then they said, we're going to do 12 live service projects, like 12. And I mean, at the time, like, and I don't think they understand, like a good live service game, right? It takes up, it is a gamer's life. If you nail it, that is the only game. Maybe there's one more, but like if you nail a live service, that is the only game that a gamer is going to play. And so trying to do 12 of those and imagining that it's going to have the same kind of success as like Fortnite and like all these other huge games, like that is like beyond fantasy. You know what I mean? So it was really
That's
crazy
high
to me.
on your own supply stuff. Like, yeah, we're gonna have 12 Fortnites, and we're gonna be, singing our way to the bank, cashing
Yeah.
bonuses for all the executives.
Yeah, I don't get it. I mean, Michael, I know you were mentioning like you've got a friend in the live service space, and I mean, like you said, they've been at it for like over 10 years and doing well for themselves, but like, it's been consistent, right? With that one game this whole time, right?
Well, they said they have, a certain amount of players,
Right.
and it does not drop and it doesn't go up. It
Right.
just carries the entire studio and their updates. And I know, and I think he's a producer on it. And another friend of mine is a writer. Where I guess again, this is one area of gaming I've never gotten into, so I'm
Mhm.
not as familiar with it. But I have a friend where I guess there's expansions, right? Like story expansions on these games.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's a writer for it, so that's literally his day job for 4 days a week. Is he writes expansions that will drop next month or whatever it is every month, and it's just for that consistent amount of people, and it's keeping everyone employed, and I'm sure the people at the studio are making a bit of money on top of that.
Right.
It's but there's no growth, I don't think, right? It's an
Yeah.
interesting business. I don't know. I'm not as familiar, but that's for these games that I had never heard of. Like, we're not talking Fortnite here.
Sure,
We're talking
sure.
like some cell phone game.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the tricky part is like there could be a world where Sony was able to execute on live service games in different formats, right? Like
Yeah,
releasing a cell phone style, you know, I don't know, some sort of like strategy, like tower defense game, right?
yeah.
Live service game or something like that. Like something to your point that could have a version of a battle pass, right? Where players spend an extra $10 like every month, every 3 months, and they unlock extra rewards and stuff. And then every 6 months, there's like a bigger update with new maps, new units, whatever the case might be. Like the idea is that it keeps you coming back for daily quests, weekly, monthly
Mhm.
updates, right? Quarterly, whatever it is, like on those cadences that it brings you back in. And there's a world where that strategy could have borne fruit. The strategy that they were trying to execute on, from all of the evidence that we've now seen and the numerous titles that they've now had to cancel, is that they were trying to build like 12, 50 to $100 million games that could sustain audiences like in all of those various lanes, and also draw from currently existing pools like Call of Duty, Apex, Fortnite, etc. And that's the other thing. Like, it's one thing to try and like carve out an audience for a live service game in a new space, but for a lot of these, they are predicated on the idea that you will be able to effectively take some audience from another game. And that is a tall order. Like, that is a very steep hill to climb. Like,
So Alan and Jeremy, have either of you gotten into live service games?
Alan,
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know. Yeah,
I'm
tell me,
big into
which one are
Fortnite.
you into the most? Would you say? Yeah,
Fortnite. I'm all in on Fortnite. And that's the thing is that like these live service games are free, and like maybe 10 years ago it's like, oh, then that's a crappy game, right? But like these games are legit. Like Fortnite is just a fun game. Call of Duty is a fun game. Apex Legends is a fun game. So that it it's very hard, like Jeremy said, to pick someone out of that because now your game's got to be better than Fortnite. And
Yeah,
Fortnite again, like the mechanics, the gameplay loop is just incredibly solid, and that's why I
yeah,
keep playing because I just have fun playing it. Now I'm not like a lot of players who put in like all of their hours into Fortnite. It's just more of like a social thing for me, playing with friends or family. So I do branch out and play, like single player stuff. But I think that especially for the younger audience, like they don't have their own income. Mom and dad probably don't necessarily want to spend. Like they're cool giving them a little bit of money, for like a skin
right,
every now and again.
yeah,
But it's like extremely appealing to play again a game that is really fun for free, and you can just on anything, iPad, iPhone, any, it's so incredibly accessible. So like yeah, like it's just like you said, it's a crazy plan to be like, yeah, we're gonna just hit 12 home runs out of the park here.
yeah. And I mean, I think well, going to your question first, Michael. Like for me, a live service, I'm not really into any live service games currently. It's like I'm not really big into Fortnite or anything like that. I think the closest thing that I participated in fairly regularly is actually Magic: The Gathering Arena. Strangely
oh,
enough, so sometimes when the new set comes out, at least in my mind, it's more economical for me to like get into the digital space. I spend some money on some gems. I get like a bunch of packs. I get some cards. I build some decks to participate in the meta of Magic for a while, and that can keep me going for 3 to 6 months. Versus if I try to play in this instance, playing the analog is extremely expensive, or can be extremely expensive. And so, I have a commander deck that I play with physically, and that one is kind of like set and forget because I don't have to worry about like staying up to date with the most recent sets on that, which is good. But even still, like when we initially had discussed the live service strategy from Sony, we talked about the concept of, they're going to line up 12, but maybe they're not expecting 12 home runs, right? They're not necessarily thinking they're all going to be Fortnites, but that there would be enough successes to make up for the failures. But the longer this strategy has carried on, the less likely it looks like they're going to be able to break even on this, right? As a company, it is certainly looking now like they are all but abandoning that strategy. Like they released Helldivers 2, fantastic, right? Did great job. There was a bit of a snafu with,
But the
like
thing is, that's not really
granted,
Sony. That's a second party. Sony's just the publisher.
I know, but like
The
that's the closest thing they have,
Okay,
right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah. But
yeah,
like
like
what I kind of want to point out there is like it's not in their DNA. Like they're not built for that. The
no.
Helldivers 2 is just like, oh yeah, we gave them the okay to publish. Like we'll give you some money while you work on it. But like they weren't heavily involved, I think, in the process of like
And then it took
designing
off.
that game.
And now, right, Alan, like, and now they're like wanting to like buddy up to Helldivers and be like, man, aren't you glad that we had this idea? And
Oh
then,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the Helldivers publishers are like, well, the creators are like, well, yeah, like thanks for the money and helping us get it published, but like this is the game that we made, right? And they, Sony purchased Bungie, right? And this, again, we're kind of rehashing some of the conversations that we had over the last year, but Bungie was huge for, obviously Halo previously, but Destiny, right? Destiny as a live service game. Destiny as this like huge shooter that got a bunch of people involved and really served as a success story, right? For what live service could be in the Sony world. And then so Sony is like, cool, we're going to buy you and we're going to basically use Destiny as the threshold, right? If Bungie says that your live service game is good, then we believe them. If they say it's bad, we're going to axe it. And so they've brought Bungie now in on a couple consultations and have effectively used their advice to nix a handful of projects already. And then adding insult to injury, Bungie like fumbles the ball
Oh,
on
they're a mess.
they're a
Complete and
mess.
total
Like
mess. Like
their
what a waste
Destiny
of
experience.
$2 billion on that company.
Yeah. So now Sony's like, okay, we put all of our eggs into this basket initially of Bungie and Destiny being like a good like live service kind of bastion for us, and then secondly thinking that we could use their guidance to launch a dozen live service projects that could make us even more money, and all of that has gone to hell, right? And so now it's like, okay, now we need to go back to what our DNA is, right? What we're known for, and that is great single player experiences, right? Get us the Ghost of Yotei, get us the Death Stranding 2, get us like all of those awesome single player experiences that bring people to our console, that bring people into our, into our ecosystem. And, if there are live service games that they can enjoy, then that's great. And I think that's the shift that we're seeing now, but it's honestly like so disappointing and really sad that so many jobs, so many studios, so many companies have basically been put through the meat grinder trying to meet this goal of having these live service games come out, right? It just wasn't a recipe for success, and we've seen that play out over the last 24 months, pretty painfully.
Yeah, and not only that, but like imagine if that money they spent on Bungie, the 2 or 2.3 billion or whatever it was, and they were like, we're just gonna make it rain on 1,000 indie devs, literally 1,000 indie game dev studios, and like they'd
Right.
have just a pipeline of incredible indie game content coming, and I can almost guarantee you a couple of those would have been huge hits that they then turn around and you can turn into a TV show or a movie, which seems like that's like what the other plan other than live service is turning The Last of Us into a TV show,
Yeah.
turning Horizon into a movie. and you can do that with those indie titles too. Like they come up with really creative stuff, like really one of the more creative segments of gaming right now. And like if they were just use that money to do that instead of wasting it on Bungie, like I can just imagine, like if you believe in string theory, like in the universe where Sony's like, no, we're doubling down on making just good story content. We're gonna take all this money and we're gonna just give it to indie dev studios, and we're gonna get plenty of a return on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, all of this talk about, or, when I was kind of thinking about, Sony's strategy and everything else on live service, and like how gamers engage with live service games, it also got me thinking a lot about just like our modern world, and also like our attention spans, right? Because like there's a few kind of topics on this, and I realize like we're probably going to shelf the third topic for the day because I think the second topic's going to carry us to time. But the this idea of attention in the modern age, there's this new book out by Chris Hayes. If you're listening to this, you should go check it out. I transparently haven't read it yet, but I've read a lot of really good things, and basically the core of the book is about like the attention economy, and essentially how our our inability to be able to maintain our attention on anything is the crux of our woes in all kinds of different ways. And I think that with the live service game structure, and with really gaming in general has evolved along with this like um attention deficit, right? Or attention, lack of attention pandemic, whatever you want to call it. Because, we've discussed in the past, Alan and I, like, kids these days, like, they don't really want to play a lot of these single player games. Like they do get pulled into these live service games, right? And that's just where they live because the socializing is happening there, but also because like some of these single player experiences require a level of like focus and immersion and like patience
Yeah.
that is maybe contrarian to the TikTok reel, the Instagram reel, the gotta get it fast sort of mentality that has basically permeated a lot of social culture.
Well, I'm surprised games haven't seen a dip in players just because I feel like you do have to have the attention for most games. Although some are so fast, like even for like playing games with my kids now, I'm like, wow, this is so fast. I don't know what's happening. I need to slow it down a bit.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do, I've sat on a plane and I've seen, people look at TikTok, just like swipe, 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 swipe. And it's
Mhm.
like, I don't know how anybody focuses on anything anymore. There,
Yeah,
there's so much content everywhere and it's all
yeah,
fighting for attention. So yeah.
yeah. And it's honestly really like it makes me wonder like how the gaming industry will continue to evolve. Like how do you, going back to our previous conversation, right? How does Sony win with a single player approach in a world where maybe gamers aren't as invested in the single player experiences because they want a jump in, jump out game. They want
Mhm.
quick games. They want, you know, like that sort of engagement, and that sort of cadence of entertainment. Um, I'm not saying, obviously I'm not trying to like paint with a broad brush, like, the kids are cooked, or whatever. Like that's not, that's not the
I think
idea.
at
It's
this
just,
point we're all cooked, my guy,
we're all,
not just
Yeah.
we're all cooked. We're all cooked, as
because
kids would
like
say.
Okay.
here's the thing, like we live in this algorithmic world, like it's just dominated by algorithms everywhere, and like I don't think that humans like want to quite live like that, but like in my opinion, like the algorithms exploit the way like our brains work to kind of get us to that point, and then now it's become the norm,
Mm,
right? Like, so I don't
yeah.
like obviously algorithms kind of make the world go round these days, so I don't know how you can
Yeah.
like completely back off of that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because, like I said, that there's definitely an awareness that we are being manipulated. Like, I think that, more and more people are like, yes, like the algorithm was good to me today. Like people acknowledge and greet and interact with the algorithm, capital T, capital A, like every day. And so I will say, like, the first step is admitting, not necessarily that you have a problem, but the first step is admitting that it's there. So I do think that that's like um encouraging, that on the whole, right, Alan, to your point, like we all see it. Like, we're not blind to the elephant that is the algorithm. But you're right, like how do we feel like we can escape that? It then becomes this idea of like, okay, just because the algorithm surface is surfacing these things to me doesn't mean that I need to accept it as, you know, what is best for me. Right. And so then it turns into, more of that. I'm going to seize my own, means of entertainment for myself, or information for myself, or education for myself. Um,
It's
but
gonna
it's
be
not,
tough though, for sure. Again,
oh
like
yeah,
it's
it's
just
not easy.
those algorithms are hitting that certain spots of the brain that are just like the brain like.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the answer is analog. We're
Yeah.
coming full circle.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
I don't I can't remember if it's California or not, Jeremy. I'm not sure if you've heard either, but I think Newsom is either wants to pass a law or may soon pass a law where kids at school will be like, okay, you're at school now, let's give you a little bit of off time from the phone. So that could potentially be sort of, we're in a moment where we kind of start to like, okay, you know what? Like, yeah, algorithms might be good for like making efficient supply chains, but maybe we don't want them ruling, what we see, what we read, and how we behave. So that could potentially kind of get the pendulum to swing back a little more away from, just constant swiping and trying to seek, the next video or the next picture or whatever.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's the Phone Free School Act, and it was signed into law September of last year.
Okay.
And basically, the mandate is by July 1st of 2026 that all school districts, charter schools, and county offices in California have to develop and implement policies to limit or prohibit student smartphone use during school hours. So it would only be able to be used during emergencies when there's a perceived threat to student safety, authorized by a teacher or administrator for educational purposes, or as stipulated in a student's individualized education program, or IEP. So, um, so that's apparently in the works. I mean, that's a 17 months from now to get it implemented, but that's basically like through
That's
the
pretty
rest of the
quick.
school year and the next school year,
Mm.
right? And then the schools will have to have something in place.
And it would have shocked me if like other states were like, oh wait. Well, they'll probably what they'll do is wait to see how it goes in California, and then they're like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
it'll be a good idea to do here.
Oh, trust me, it's gonna be used as a it's gonna be a political billy club. Like,
Yeah,
they're gonna be like, "Oh, do you want your kids to be controlled like the kids in California or whatever?"
yeah.
Like, it'll be a mess. But yeah, it is promising that's at least starting, because I think that the idea that, you know, it's difficult for kids to be able to focus, right? Like, it's difficult for adults to focus, right? Like, and that's why I'm saying, like, I don't want to say like, oh, the kids are cooked. Like, we're cooked, right? Like, adults are so cooked. Like, you can't, you walk into, I think Chris had this example, right? Like, you walk into a coffee shop and you pat your pocket and you don't have your phone, and you're like, what do you mean? I gotta like stand here in line, like just wait for my coffee? Like, I'm like stranded here.
Sit here
Like,
with
this
my
is
own thoughts.
terrible. Right, yeah, with my own thoughts, forget about it. Like, it's definitely not isolated to the younger generation, right? Like, the
Mhm.
technology, the algorithm, like this whole entertainment structure has now basically built like a dome over all of us, and we're all in it.
We
But
are very much lost in the sauce,
we
all
are
of
lost
us.
in the sauce.
Yeah.
And so again, how does that translate into how we engage with our entertainment? How does that engage with how we engage with, comic books, right? And Michael, going back into the world that you and I both are kind of in as well. Like, when you think about, getting kids to pick up a physical comic book, even, right? It used to be like, of course, people always kind of poo-pooed, kids reading comics. They're like, that's not real literature. But then it got to a point where like, well, let's just have them read anything. Like words are words, right? And if they'll read books that have pictures in them, cool. But now, right, like how, getting them to read comic books in a physical sense versus digital, and then,
That's
that
why,
kind of
but
thing too.
that's also why I was like, this book can't just be for kids. I don't want it to be for young adults only. It
Yeah.
has to be something that adults can enjoy. And I think Stranger Things, if we're using video games, I think do that. You get kids playing and adults playing the same games.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stranger Things does a good job of adults watch it, kids watch it. I
Mhm.
wanted my comic to be like that because I don't know if there's a lot of comics like that. Like,
Right. Right.
you could give your kid absolute Batman, but it's a bit mature in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a good entry.
Where that Venn diagram is, I think, is for the appreciation of the character, right? So like the dad could be like,
Mhm.
oh man, I think Batman as a character is super cool, right? And then you try to give them absolute Batman 1, and maybe the kid's like, yeah, but like even then, right? That example is kind of odd because they're kind of Snyder's kind of playing with the mythos and stuff too.
Totally.
But like, so like you can have a shared appreciation for maybe like
Character.
the character themselves, but to your point, like it might not appeal to both of those demographics in the same way as powerfully, right? But like you said, with Armored, with Stranger Things, with these other
Harry Potter.
examples, Harry
Harry Potter,
Potter, right?
Star Wars, yeah.
Yeah, so like I feel like they are two separate lanes, but like the adults and the kids both can say like, yes, Star Wars is cool.
Yes.
So that's the tricky thing. Like, how do you get a kid to say Batman is cool while still like kind of sticking to like a good Batman story? Like
Yeah.
that's so I think that's kind of where the challenge is. But anyway, um, this has been a fun little chat. I'm going to tell the listeners like we never presume to come to any sort of conclusion on any of these things. By the way, this is just us talking. I hope that it's got you thinking about some stuff too. But Michael, really thank you so much for joining us today. This was really great chat.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, guys. I honestly really appreciate it, and it was good to talk about this stuff.
Yeah,
It's
no,
it's the
absolutely.
future.
The future, we'll see what happens. But
Yeah.
anyways, that's all from us today. So thanks again, as always, for listening in. Until next time, I'm Jeremy.
I'm Alan.
May your save points never be too far away. See you later, everybody.
Yep.